Hey guys, so today let's talk about the KEF LS50s. I purchased these speakers in 2018 for reference for everybody's understanding. Like I've had these speakers now for 6 years. I did not purchase these when they were originally released. I think I got these a couple years after. A speaker that I had right before this was a pair of ELAC debut. And I believe they were the 2.1s, give or take, or something like that. At that time, I got these speakers and I bought the ELACs to compare. And I ran both of those speakers for a little while, really just to test out which ones I liked. And I ended up returning the ELAC debuts and keeping these. I don't know if I'll ever really know, because I've always heard that the ELAC speakers require an insane amount of burn-in time. And so people swear up and down that those speakers get better and better and better. But to my ears, the ELAC debut speakers at that time compared to these, there was no comparison. And my perception was that the KEFs were just this incredible audiophile speaker because of their dynamic range and some of the, I think, more detailed nuance that these could extract. But yeah, so just like build quality, when I got these speakers and I pulled them out of the box, I was so impressed with just the way that these speakers feel solid built. There is like an aesthetic about these that I think is kind of Best Buy friendly, if that makes any sense. But they're trying, I think, with the aesthetics of this design, and this is like a wave guide and they've engineered and designed this to be a certain way. But I also just think that aesthetically these speakers really fit into a more modern, updated home. And if you have a small space and you're looking at, well, I just want to get some incredible speakers to fill this space, then these just fit that bill so well, because they're this single driver, or they appear to be a single driver, and they're not obtrusive. I think they present as a very minimal looking speaker. Visually, how we see something, I think, also plays a major role in our psychology and how we how we overall, or how we interpret it overall. When you have much larger speakers that are visually dominating a room, that kind of psychologically impacts how you hear the sound, right? Because those speakers being so large right out of the gate fit into your mind as like, this is going to be a much larger listening experience than perhaps it even is. But so there's like a psychological effect, I think, that happens with the aesthetic of speakers, and how they dominate space, or how they fade into the space, or how well do they fit into the architecture or the interior design of your space. And so, like, yes, these speakers sound incredible, but if you ask me why are so many people buying these speakers, I would wager to say that it's not just the perceived sound quality, and that a major part of that has to do with the aesthetics and the overall appearance being this speaker that is not very obstructive or in your face. I think especially like with the black color or the white color, depending on how that fits into the overall aesthetic of your space, you can have a speaker that pretty much like blends into the surrounding context. And so like, how does that affect the overall perception of our sound, right? Well, literally, I think when speakers are disappeared in a physical sense, that also has some psychological benefit on our awareness of where sound is coming from. And this is, I think, purely like speculative and possibly psychological mumbo jumbo, if you want to say so yourself. But yeah, there is just something so aesthetically pleasing about it. This waveform and these little ridges in the surrounding little rubber piece here with this waveform. It's just such a cool looking design. It's kind of like a mix of aesthetic. It's got this like 1960s retro look, but at the same time, the materials and the finishes of it are updated for a more modern world. The mirrored gloss piano finish, at least for my use case, has not had any major issues. It's something that I can confidently take a microfiber cloth to and wipe down, and I've not had any major swirl marks or scratches or anything reveal themselves in the finish over the course of ownership. If it doesn't look good, if it's not well constructed and it's not going to last or hold up to just wear and tear in everyday use, then it doesn't really matter how good it sounds. Again, I think that those things are one of the reasons why you would want to look at a KEF speaker. So, their minimal aesthetic, I think, is a big reason why people are buying these speakers. So take that, I think, for what it is, but like what KEF has done with these LS50s is I think that they have done such an excellent job of going to a much higher end speaker. And they have now captured some of those qualities and they've repackaged them into a speaker that you can buy for $1,500. I think that if you're in the realm of bookshelf speakers, these have given me everything that I've ever wanted. I think the one thing or the characteristics or the things that I may seek moving on from these speakers in this particular space are going to be things that only bigger speakers are going to give me. And so what do I even mean by that? It's just a fuller sound, a bigger body. Bigger speakers are going to be able to pressurize this space more efficiently than these will ever. And so, with that being said, these are going to reach their limit and you're going to know whether or not they've reached the limit in your space. I've ran probably 6 different amplifiers through these speakers up until this point now. So I don't have any lack of experience with powering these speakers. So I am pretty well informed on how different types of amplifiers or different amounts of power are going to change the overall characteristics of this speaker. And when I purchased these speakers, they were incredible for the time from what I had experienced before, but within the first year or so of ownership, it's really when, to me, I felt that there just was not enough power to really activate the bass drivers. And it was always this feeling of like, oh my gosh, I know there's so much more that I can extract out of the speakers. Whether that was my amplifier rolling off frequency ranges that the speakers, knowing that the speakers could play farther, deeper into the frequency range, and whether that was the amplifier that was rolling those off or not. And some of that could have been because one of the first amps that I had paired with this was a vintage amp, but just my experience initially after the first year of ownership was, I feel like there's more here that I'm missing. And that's really when I began my pursuit for finding an amplifier that was going to power these. And I spent so much time online reading forums because there are like a handful of amplifiers that everybody recommends to pair with these KEFs. That being said, when they came out, when I purchased them, there were so many reviewers claiming that anything could power them. And that is true of any speaker. So it doesn't really tell you enough about what these can do when you just say, yes, this thing will power it. Anything will power these speakers. I know this, but the lower frequency range of these speakers, to activate the bass in these speakers, you need a super high current amplifier that's going to double into 4 ohms. You need something like a solid state Class A amplifier, something big, beefy with a massive toroidal transformer, or you need, a tube amplifier, you know. So there are a lot of people that will buy these for $1,500. That's a bargain of a price for any speaker. But I think that's where you have to have a conversation about these, because if you buy them for $1,500 and you pair them with a sub $1,000 amplifier, there's a high probability that you are not going to get the total performance out of these speakers. And so you just kind of have to accept that, like, that's going to be your experience with those speakers, or you're going to start to want to push into the realm of expensive amplifiers like the Hagels and some of these other amplifiers that are getting up in there to the $5,000 price point. Hagel and Parasound are two amplifiers that tons of people have driven with these and have basically mentioned how they're like a godlike pairing with this speaker. And while I have not tried Hagel or Parasound amplifiers, I have tried Class A amplifiers, and I have a tube amplifier that I use with these. And both of those are, I would classify those amplifiers as being a more full-bodied, warmer listening experience, or they can be, compared to Class D. And it has been my experience that those warmer amplifiers really have helped balance this speaker. And, I still think it's a balanced speaker in the sense that, like, this isn't a mid-range speaker only. It's not a speaker designed for bass. It's not a speaker even designed for just top-end extension. I really find that it's a neutral speaker, and it depends on what you pair with it. If you pair a warmer sounding amp, it's going to help bring up the mid-range and some of the body of the speaker, and it might completely flush in the bottom end. I think that the power requirement has been something of a bit problematic for these speakers, and the only reason that I have pursued trying to find the right amp for these speakers, I think, is because, to me, they had all the characteristics of a very dynamic audiophile speaker, in that they had this delicateness if they wanted it to. They had this top-end extension that was so incredibly detailed. Really, first order of business in building a hi-fi system is to search for dynamics. Yeah, really just this kind of top-end extension and low-end extension that maybe we'd never heard before. And I think, in addition to that, of any speaker that I had ever heard in my life, I had always heard bass with older speakers, and even some of the ELAC speakers that I had, played before these. Those speakers all had a little bit more of a bloat, a little bit more of a weight in the bass. And that perception is, wow, this is big, boomy bass, and it's visceral. But when you realize that there are songs where you have actual bass-like instruments, like an upright bass, things with really great texture and timbre and fast rhythm and fast pace, things like jazz, where not big, boomy rock and roll, but delicate tracks and things that require lots of texture. And, to me, that kind of music, when I started to listen to that kind of those genres on these speakers, it was like something had become unlocked in me. It was this understanding that, oh my God, there's so much more to bass and texture than I thought there could ever be. And it comes down to these speakers' ability to image and create a sense of space and scale and instrument separation that allow you to really hear all of this detail and nuance in the track. And up until I bought these, I really had never heard that in a speaker before. I had heard Magnapans before and other speakers, even larger tower-like speakers, but I just never heard this kind of nuance and delicate detail before. So that was one of the reasons why I kept them. And I always felt like it's a little bit too top-endy at times, and I always was searching to tone that down ever so slightly. But at least in my listening space at that time, my perception was I can do that probably with some minor tweaks, either through amplification, EQ, or even possibly adding a subwoofer, which, you know, I think, spoiler alert, I 100% think there are ways to extract more bass out of these speakers. And it really boils down to synergy, and it boils down to proper placement and proper amplification. And I really think it's as simple as that. So yes, you can put any amplifier on these speakers that you think will power it, and it will probably sound great. Whether or not its low-end performance is going to be there for you and your specific needs or tastes, I think that that's possibly to be discovered on your own. And there are a lot of people that don't really listen to a lot of music with lots of bass, and they think these speakers have plenty of bass. That being said, look, if you're going to listen to very bass-heavy music, dance music and things like that, or you want to listen to like club-like music, these are not going to be for you. I think it's just pretty simple as that. These are about creating fast and accurate, tight bass. And so I think the reason why I love these is that you get great sub bass. It's people say they don't have bass, but I think you do. I think you get this great mid bass texture that is there. And then from there, if you need more bass, you can pair a subwoofer with these and get a whole other layer of sub bass below what you get out of these. And then when you do that, you get this pretty incredible full range experience, which I have paired these with the KEF KC62. And I do want to eventually get a subwoofer with these if I decide to keep these long term. But, I would say that my experience with the subwoofer, it was crazy with these. Crazy. Because these become so much more efficient, especially if you have them hooked up to a crossover where now you can filter out a lot of the low end coming out of these speakers. These speakers then become so much more efficient because now they only need to power, the upper range frequencies, and they're free, and then that frees these up to then have to only really power the higher frequencies. I guess what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about the overall sound quality as how I have them hooked up, in my current system. And so, as I've already said, I bought the Skit Freya, and so as I already kind of stated, so it was at that point that I had the Skit Freya, and then I also had the Rogue Audio Sphinx V2. Kind of set up as a pairing with the preamp and the Rogue. And so at least, yeah, so once I had that hooked up in that particular setup, I was fully loving the tube stage of the Skit with these and the Rogue. It was a really great balance of the two. And there was something about the tubes, I think, that just made it a little bit more of a sweeter presentation. I think, like, in a sense, tubes, what they are really doing is kind of blurring the boundaries a bit between all this stuff going on in the mix. And when you have a lesser quality recording, or if your system is far too revealing and it's revealing those harsh edges of where instruments are getting cut off and coming in and out of tracks, what tubes do is kind of help ease those edges a bit. And it's one of the reasons why I truly love tubes so much, is because we just have to face the fact that there's so much music being recorded on the digital domain that is either not properly mixed, or it's just such a flat frequency response because it's been compressed, or they're pulling from old samples or old recordings or whatever. And so, I think perhaps some of my experience with these speakers relates to the types of music that I have listened to on them. Because for the types of music that I listen to, I don't listen to 100% audiophile recordings. I'm listening to a wide range of music. Sometimes it's classical, sometimes it's just crappy indie rock that was poorly recorded from 2010. When we talk about the tonal listening experience, a lot of people are only ever going to give reviews about how this sounds on one song, how this sounds with this one genre of music, because they themselves may only listen to one genre of music. I've listened to vocal heavy music, as in singer-songwriter type of stuff. I've listened to electronic music that is all synthesizers and samples. I've listened to classic rock that was recorded in the 70s on these. Across that wide range of music, for the most part, on almost everything I put in these, sounds great. Everything. They're, especially with jazz vocalists, single instrument stuff, you can have this insane audiophile listening experience. And I guess what I mean by that is when you go to the HiFi show, they're going to put on some guy playing guitar. And you can play a track like that on these, and it's just going to freaking blow you away, because that type of music is so simple that how can they not extract that detail and nuance out of something so simple, right? At the same time, I have played hip hop tracks. You can play MF Doom on these, and they still deliver. So, having said what I just said about that, it ultimately is the pursuit of wanting to listen to some of these other genres that have led me to seek a more desirable or warmer sound from these. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's basically what I just said, is that you get certain songs or music that perhaps is not well recorded, or it's meant to sound lo-fi, old, vintage, whatever, and you want to play that type of music. That type of music just may not sound great on your $20,000 hi-fi speakers. So that's where, for me, integrating tubes, I think, becomes a priority for these. And probably even for a lot of speakers, depending on what type of music or what that overall experience is that you're seeking. So, could I have bought warmer speakers from the get-go? Could you go out and just buy warmer speakers or more mid-range centric speakers? Yeah, absolutely. But I think the reason why you don't do that, and the reason why you buy a speaker like KEF's, is because you want to be able to have the engine just in case you can't, just in case you want to. The KEFs give you the engine. They give you the dynamics and the full frequency range. They give you the bass if you're willing to go there. All of those things can be had if you're willing to, I think, explore the depths of this speaker. So it's not something that I'm going to buy this speaker because I think I like mid-range, and then in a year or 2 years or 3 years go, well, I just heard my friend's speakers and they're so much more dynamic than mine, and I think I'd rather have those speakers than those. Don't do that to yourself. But so anyway, so as an engine, I think that you buy these speakers because they fundamentally are just this great foundational beginning point in somebody's journey an audiophile. Like, they're an accessible speaker that are going to give you a whole host of characteristics that you're going to find on speakers that are costing twice as much as this. And I know there's so many great speakers out there in the market at this price point. And I think, you know, it has a lot of competition. And so it really begs the question, why these over other speakers? And it just gets back to the thing that I'm constantly harking about, I think, with with this total experience about being more than just sound and more than just audio quality, and that it's this total visceral kind of like visual, auditorial, spatial experience. And they're going to give you this whole host of characteristics, including, great imaging and great soundstage and this great big deep and, wide soundstage. And it's going to give you all of these dynamic qualities. And also, like, at the same time, I find this speaker to be so incredibly spatial. And for me, like, that's what makes this speaker such a killer at $1,500. And I think, getting back to what I was stating earlier, is like, there is possibilities to take this up a notch by pairing it with the subwoofer. And so my recommendation with these speakers, and this is really what I believe, is I think that it is in your best interest to possibly skip the metas. And the reason being is because in my experiences with listening to the metas versus these, I didn't think that there was enough of a change in sound to really warrant the additional price of the metas. And currently right now, you can go out and buy a pair of these used for about $600, $800. And then what you could do from there is pair it with, an SVS micro or a REL sub, or you could look at the KEF KC62, and then for roughly $1,400, depending on what subwoofer you pair with these, you're going to get a full range experience that's going to blow you out of the water compared to just going out and purchasing the metas. And I guess that's really my big conclusion after owning these for 6 years, is that I'm not saying you need a subwoofer with these, and I'm not even saying that the bass on these is inadequate. I just think that when we compare, right, 6 years of listening to music, watching movies, watching TV across a whole range of different experiences, both visual and auditorial, my findings is that there is enough desire to have more of a sub bass, more of a foundation down below. And so with the pairings that I have sort of landed on currently, where I'm at now, I think that I have extracted as much mid-range and bass out of these speakers as I could possibly get. And I think from here, it's really a size limitation. And that's possibly something to consider, right? Because easily I can buy a bigger speaker and get more bass. But then do I lose out on a lot of this top end extension or a lot of its delicateness that I really enjoy? Because I think that delicateness that this speaker is capable of playing, whether it be like really small micro details and textures, which is one of the things that I love about this speaker the most, certainly I'm not saying a bigger speaker can't have that, but it's something that I think about. And it just kind of gets back to this engine theory or this engine concept of like, buy these because it gets you the engine. And then if it's not fast enough, go buy some NOS and, get more horsepower out of them. And I think that's where you can go with these, is you can pair them with a subwoofer or a warmer or a much larger Class A amplifier. And from there, you can kind of extend the frequency range and turn it into a more full range listening experience. And so, yeah, I mean, I could talk about these for days, guys, but I think really that's the majority of this review is, after 6 years of listening to these, I still really love these speakers. And I don't foresee myself getting rid of these because I think that this is such a great reference point, at least in my journey. I think I'm always going to have these as a reference point. Anyways, thanks, guys.